Greetings. Welcome to Cyber Focus, your source for international business information. I'm your host, Ryan Craven, and our guest today is Dr. Carmen Luca Sugawara. She has more than 20 years of experience in international social development, working and researching on issues such as civil society networking, civil society strengthening, community development, and parental involvement in post-war reconstruction. She's currently an associate professor at Indiana University School of Social Work. Today, she's going to share with us a bit of her experience developing and teaching internationalized curricula, including a short-term study abroad course to Croatia, and her research considering the impact these programs can have on the local communities. Carmen, thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. So kind of jumping right into it, knowing that you've worked so long to internationalize curricula in higher education, can you kind of share a little bit about your contributions to the IU School of Social Work's specifically their study abroad program and your Croatian study abroad course?
So the course it takes students 18 days in Croatia. It gives them an opportunity to engage with various stakeholders that have contributed to supporting this post-war communities, but also community members and organizations and universities. We work with 2 university ones. We all know that classroom education does as much as it can do for students, but it is that experiential learning that really moves students from being passive learners in many ways to becoming active citizens of what I like to say global world. And so that exchange with the context, it gives them what Paulo Freire really talks about, that moment of conscientizations, getting students to continually evolve and work on finding ways to discover their place and role in the society that goes beyond actually the classroom. So that awakening moment is transformative. And I think that's what I really love to witness, not only what the students are learning, but how the community responds, as well as what community learns from the interaction with our students. And these exchanges become really 2 ways and powerful.
Yeah, it was interesting. You mentioned John Dewey. That didn't really come up in our previous conversation, but I have a background in experiential education and outdoor education specifically. So that topic and his books have come to my light as well. And so I'm a big believer in that experiential component for students of in any way that we can actually provide that, because I think it gives them that real world application and creates that more transformative experience for them and helps them, especially with these study abroad courses and experiences, to really showcase that they are members of the world and not just specifically from the US or from Indiana or wherever they happen to be from originally. And that's one thing that in the various conversations with different interviewees I've had since the pandemic, one thing it has certainly highlighted is that how interconnected the world is, and nobody lives in a bubble anymore, whether it's just experiences, the spreading of the pandemic, supply chains. The world is becoming more and more interconnected, and we had talked about that before, but highlighting that it's this notion of being a global citizen. And would you kind of elaborate on that topic a little bit?
Education for global citizenship is really a framework for learning that takes students, with what I said, outside of the classroom, engaging with the world, with the new context that unfolds before them, in engaging them in educational exchanges beyond the school. And it gives them the opportunity to develop that international mindness. And I love to call on George Mead, because he, at the beginning, in I think 1907, he talks in his work and observing Jane Addams' work at the Hull House. He talks about this, how central is for society to reach its full democracy, that self needs to be really developed in a way that is connected with the community. And he says international mindedness is the ability to understanding the community as embraced by all people. Isn't that extraordinary that so long ago we were called to remember that it's not the national borders that get us really to understand and work on complex challenges, but us together as member of a human community. So global citizenship is really about encouraging people to develop that set of competencies, professional skills, knowledge, values that they need to engage in the world. And various scholars look differently at this global citizenship, whether they look at, moral development, specific competencies of professional or political development. But what it really gets at, it gets at honing and developing that sense of self and place in a human community that is it's not about national borders. So I believe that this international learning opportunities, and I want to really point to a difference between necessarily study abroad, where students are just taking going in a different context, crossing borders and learning about the culture, but those global community engaged educational processes in which students are really creating co-creating knowledge through the engagement with a new context, through serving and working, learning from those local partners that are hosting us. Those, I think, are really transformative, shaping our students' identity and raising that consciousness, global consciousness. And I say that, if in the past, the Western domination always shaped the way higher education institutions and in many ways, academic knowledge and the way global engagement took place, I think this course, perhaps, or I want to say that this course gives a new perspective in that it gives us an opportunity to recognize that the Western world can do it alone. Universities, higher education universities cannot do it alone. But it is that shift and creating that space that allowed for global South practitioners that allowed us to engage with their expertise, that invite us to work with them, that is going to be transformative, defining really how we are going to move forward.
Course where you might be learning about the culture, but really, which has its merits, absolutely. But that focus on actual engagements and collaboration and work, and really that day-to-day interaction to solve a problem, I think speaks to that idea of experiential education and really hones that work ethic and helps the students relate with that local community, because they're not only learning about the community, but they're doing it through the context of trying to, solve a problem or work through a specific solution. And kind of following up on that with the kind of the global community engagement and learning opportunities for students, kind of go into your research interests as well, right? The studying the impact not just on the students but also on those communities for for better or for worse. Is it a dependency? Is it actually having a positive impact? And I was kind of surprised to hear you say it, right, that it's not an area that is as studied or as researched as I would have thought.
We know very little about our impact on local communities. We know very little about the contributions we make. We know a lot about, for the past decade, also century, I would say, We know a lot about the importance, and we understand why higher education institutions ought to embrace this pedagogy of experiential learning and how to work with communities to benefit our students. We know a lot how important it is for our faculty, and of course we know a lot that when universities are engaged in this, they get quite a lot of, they get credits and are recognized in many ways. And we know we treasure these community partnerships, but I was surprised to notice that very little we know about the impact of our community engaged education on local communities. So I, in my sabbatical, in my Fulbright sabbatical in 2019, 2020, I began to really take a closer look at the literature, but also develop a framework that potentially will help us unpack, is really paying attention to not only, let's see, what are the community assets that exist, and let us understand what the university is doing in supporting the capacity, the assets development, whether human capital or other forms of stocks that are evolving as a result of our interaction or not. But also let us pay attention if there is any change happening in terms of the functioning capacity of communities. What I mean by that is the ability of groups of people and organizations to come together to leverage what they have and really be transformative in their community, looking really at, beginning to look at, are we as higher education institutions through our community engaged programs and work with local communities, building on leadership development in new social structures. We know that a lot is being done through social processes, and we create lots of them and social structures as we engage with the world. But we don't really know what helps, what supports their own initiatives. And so I look at the functioning capacity, but I also propose that we look at transformational capacity of communities that really rest in that community's collective capability to envision its long-term goals, to influence social policy and social change. So its ability to approve, disapprove, and recommend long-term solutions. Community engaged education is important for our benefits, for our academic units, for our students, but we also may have a place and a role in fostering local capacity for community development, which this topic is also a great local capacity for development is also a focus of interest for social development. A lot of work done to promote local capacity for development was done with local governments, with civil society groups, with think tanks, with universities, just a little bit, bringing them to do an assessment, but not necessarily to engage as active stakeholders in designing and systematically thinking about ways to build local capacity. So I believe there is a niche here and a possibility to bring the two together, the higher education community engaged programs and social development actors, to begin looking at possible impact, which I'm hoping to bring forward with this research. During my sabbatical, I developed this framework, and then I developed an instrument that was tested in an exploratory way and collected data in 3 countries in the region, Croatia, Bosnia, and Kosovo, looking at what is the role of our education in building local capacity, and inviting both higher education faculty that are promoting community engaged education, as well as host community organizations to share with us some of their experiences, so that we get a little closer to understanding this topic. So it's quite exciting.
Well, and I think one of the things that I really appreciate about that line of reasoning in that conversation is, having the opportunity to really dive in, have a structure and a system in place to do hopefully a little bit of a long-term study to identify really what works and what doesn't work for these experiences. And granted, every community and issue is different and adjusting accordingly, but hopefully with some of your research, you can identify the core structure or the relationship structure that helps meet those needs and has a positive impact, and at least pull those pieces out and share those in a broader perspective, so that more of these community engagement focused courses can follow that to lead to a little bit better capacity building and a little bit more sustainability, hopefully.
Brian, Ryan, the other thing that I'm thinking, sorry, I just called you Brian. So the other part that's really exciting is that now this COVID and the challenges that we are facing in our communities have given us the opportunity to begin really articulating this topic of decolonizing curricula. But I would say it's not only that, decolonizing internationalization and global community engagement is equally important. And, when I think about what is really meaning, we basically want to invite the local communities to be part of the conversation. It's not a colonialistic, imperialistic, or racist approach, but it's one that creates that space for sharing and building knowledge that comes from not only from the Western world. I think this global community engaged education programs could really have a place by bringing forward these partners and their voices and their expertise in the conversations. And so these are the type of things that I really wrestle with and think about. How can we have great intentions, but how can we bring these conversations more overtly to the table and really hold each other accountable to the goodness we hope we promote? I don't doubt the intentions, but the consequences are equally important. And so my research focus, coupled with this community engaged, global community engaged educational commitments, fuel my days here at IU and get excited. So thank you for the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing some of the results of your potential research and sharing those, again, the positives and the success stories, kind of what works and what doesn't work, so that not just the courses and the social work, but hopefully IU kind of institution wide can pick up on some best practices for really focusing on that global community engagement. Thanks again for taking the time today and sharing some information about your course and your perspective on the kind of the global citizenship and your research.
So thank you for having me.
That's it for this edition of Cyber Focus. For future suggestions on topics or questions, please drop us a line at cyber@indiana.edu.